Walter Bennett's evenings had fallen into a rhythm so predictable that the clock on his kitchen wall might as well have been a metronome. Each night, after finishing a modest meal for one, he rinsed the same plate, fork, and cup. He wiped down the counter, even though there was little to clean. Then, as though honoring a silent ritual, he washed the pale blue mug his wife Helen had loved. He always dried it carefully and placed it back in its exact spot, the same place it had rested when she was alive. That mug had become a shrine to everything he missed about her, the way she hummed while stirring soup, the gentle tap of her fingers on the countertop, her voice reminding him not to leave newspapers scattered on the table. The little house in Astoria, Queens, still carried her presence. Walter sometimes thought he could smell the faint trace of her perfume when the summer breeze drifted through the lace curtains. But most evenings it felt cavernous, every corner echoing the silence she left behind. He shuffled into the living room and lowered himself into the brown leather armchair Helen had insisted on years ago, back when she worried about his posture. The leather was cracked now, worn smooth by years of crossword puzzles and evening news broadcasts. On the side table sat a family photo, taken at his son Ethan's wedding 5 years earlier. Helen's smile glowed in the picture, her arm wrapped proudly around their boy. Back then, Walter had thought they were building something permanent, family bonds that would last a lifetime. But things hadn't turned out that way. The last time Walter and Ethan had spoken, voices had risen, pride had swollen like a balloon ready to burst. Ethan had asked for a large sum of money, an investment opportunity, he'd called it. Walter had refused. It wasn't the money itself, it was the way Ethan wanted it, quick, easy, reckless. Walter had built his restaurant business from scratch, every penny earned through hard work. He knew shortcuts always came with hidden costs. He'd tried to explain, but Ethan heard only rejection. He'd stormed out, leaving a year of silence between them. Walter often replayed that night in his mind, wondering if Helen would have handled it differently. She had always known how to soften hard edges, how to bridge the gaps between father and son. Without her, the gap had widened into an ocean. The phone's sudden ring pierced the quiet like a trumpet blast. Walter startled, fumbling for the receiver mounted on the wall. He slipped on his reading glasses and squinted at the caller ID. The name made his heart stutter. Ethan. For a moment he simply stared, unable to move. Then, with a breath that rattled in his chest, he lifted the receiver. "Hello?" His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Pop?" The line crackled, but the voice was unmistakable. Ethan's tone carried a tremor, that same nervous edge Walter remembered from his boyhood, like when he'd broken the neighbor's window and wasn't sure how much trouble he was in. Walter gripped the receiver tighter, his knuckles whitening. "Ethan, I wasn't expecting—" "I know," Ethan interrupted, his words tumbling fast, then stopping short. Walter could hear him inhale, shaky and uneven. "It's been too long, way too long." Walter sank into his chair, the weight of years pressing on his shoulders. "How are you, son?" "I'm good. Really good." Ethan hesitated, then added, "Chloe and we've been talking. We realized how much we miss having you around, how much we miss family." The word hung in the air like a fragile ornament. Family. Walter stared at the photo on the table, his eyes lingering on Helen's smile. They had been family once, before pride and money and silence built walls between them. "I miss it too," Walter admitted softly, surprised by the honesty in his own voice. Would you consider coming for dinner tonight?" Ethan's voice trembled with an urgency Walter hadn't heard in years. "Chloe's making that pot roast you always loved. We could sit down and talk, really talk, like we used to." Walter blinked, staring at the refrigerator in his kitchen, covered in magnets and faded photographs. One photo showed Ethan at 17, grinning at his high school graduation, Helen's arm wrapped around him. That moment had felt like a beginning. Maybe tonight could be one too. "It's short notice," Ethan continued quickly, "but Chloe's already cooking. We don't want to waste more time. We've wasted enough." Walter could almost hear Helen's voice in his head. Families find their way back, given time. "What time?" Walter asked, surprising himself as much as Ethan. 7:30. We moved to Greenwich last year. I'll text you the address. Greenwich. The name carried weight. Affluence, polished driveways, manicured lawns. Walter's eyebrows rose. How had Ethan managed that? But before he could ask, Ethan's voice softened. "Pop, thank you. Thank you for giving us another chance." After he hung up, Walter sat in silence, staring at Helen's picture. Her smile seemed to whisper across the years. "It's time, Walter. It's time to go home." The rest of the evening unfolded with a sense of urgency Walter hadn't felt in months. He climbed the narrow stairs to his bedroom, where Helen's perfume bottles still stood in neat rows on her dresser, dust collecting on their glass surfaces. He opened the closet and pushed past old sweaters until his hand found the navy suit Helen had bought him for Ethan's high school graduation. "You need something nice for important occasions," she'd said, smoothing the lapels with her careful hands. "And our son's graduation is definitely important." The suit had seen him through job interviews, anniversaries, even Helen's funeral. Now it would mark another milestone. Walter dressed slowly, his movements deliberate. He shaved carefully, catching his reflection in the mirror. The man staring back looked older than he felt, silver threading through his hair, lines carved deep around his eyes. Would Ethan notice how much he'd aged? Would Chloe? He dabbed aftershave on his jawline, the sharp scent mingling with memory. On the counter sat Helen's last bottle of Chanel No. 5. He touched it lightly with his fingers, as though afraid to disturb her ghost, then turned away. Downstairs, he selected a bottle of aged whiskey from the cabinet. A peace offering, he thought. Something to bridge the gap between past hurts and future hopes. When his phone buzzed with Ethan's text, an address on Elm Street in Greenwich, Walter typed it into his Uber app. 8 minutes until pickup. He stood by the front window, watching the sun sink behind the rooftops of Queens. The air carried the smell of grilled food from a neighbor's yard, mixed with the faint sound of children laughing in the street. Mrs. Patel from next door waved from her stoop, and Walter raised a hand in return. For the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of something more than routine. Maybe tonight really could change everything. The Uber arrived right on time, a clean sedan with a young driver who greeted Walter with a cheerful, "Evening, sir." Walter settled into the back seat, smoothing the suit trousers across his knees. The car pulled away, leaving behind the brownstones of Astoria, the corner deli where he'd bought Helen flowers on Fridays, the sidewalks worn smooth by decades of footsteps. Highways stretched ahead, carrying him from the modest grid of Queens to the manicured suburbs of Connecticut. He watched the transformation through the window. Houses grew larger, lawns greener, driveways longer. By the time the car rolled into Greenwich, Walter was staring at mansions that looked more like country clubs than family homes. Pride stirred in his chest, but unease crept in alongside it. How had Ethan managed this? The car slowed in front of a sprawling estate with white columns, a fountain bubbling in the circular drive, and 2 luxury cars gleaming under the porch lights. The driver whistled softly. "Beautiful place," he said. Walter nodded, though his hand trembled as he counted out bills and slipped the young man a tip. "Have a good evening," he murmured. The heavy wooden door loomed ahead, framed by immaculate hedges. Walter climbed the steps, his polished shoes clicking against stone. Before he could reach for the brass knocker, the door swung open, and just like that, he was no longer in Astoria. He was inside a house too perfect, standing at the threshold of a night that would change everything. The foyer smelled faintly of lemon polish and fresh-cut flowers, the kind of scent that belonged in a magazine spread, not a family home. Marble tiles gleamed under the chandelier's warm light, reflecting Walter's polished but well-worn shoes. For a moment, he felt as though he'd stepped onto a stage set where every detail had been carefully arranged for show. A woman stood waiting, dressed in a crisp black uniform that marked her as household staff. Middle-aged, with streaks of gray threading her dark hair, she greeted him with a practiced smile. "Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice warm but edged with something harder to define. "Welcome. I'm Lucia. Mr. Ethan and Mrs. Chloe are expecting you." Walter nodded, slipping out of his jacket and handing it to her. "Thank you." Lucia accepted it with careful hands, but her eyes lingered a second too long, her smile faltering before she disappeared toward the coat closet. "Pop!" Ethan's voice boomed from the hallway. His footsteps echoed across the marble, quick and eager. Walter turned and saw his son striding toward him, looking sharper than any memory he had of him. Ethan wore a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than Walter's entire wardrobe. His hair was perfectly styled, his teeth startlingly white. He threw his arms around his father in a hug that lingered a moment longer than felt natural. "You look great," Ethan said, stepping back with a grin. "Really great." Walter managed a smile. "You too, son. This place." He glanced around, his words catching on the opulence. "Real estate," Ethan said quickly, almost cutting him off. "Caught the market at just the right time. Lucky timing, mostly." Walter nodded slowly, though the words didn't quite land. "Pop, this is Chloe." A figure swept gracefully into view. Chloe Bennett looked every inch the part of Greenwich affluence. Her silk dress draped perfectly, her jewelry understated but expensive, her smile polished. She leaned in and kissed Walter on the cheek, her perfume wrapping around him like a subtle warning. "We're so happy you're here," she said, her tone sweet but oddly rehearsed. Walter studied her for a moment. He'd only spent a handful of meals with her over the years, yet tonight she seemed to know exactly how to put him at ease. "This house is incredible," Walter said, genuinely impressed despite himself. Chloe's smile deepened. "We wanted tonight to be special. We want to start over, Walter, all of us." "Family," Ethan echoed, his hand landing on Walter's shoulder with gentle insistence. They led him into the dining room, and Walter's breath caught. The table looked like something from a period drama. Mahogany polished to a mirror finish, china plates rimmed in gold, crystal glasses that threw little rainbows under the chandelier's glow. Silverware lay arranged with military precision. A pot roast's savory scent drifted from behind swinging kitchen doors. "This is beautiful," Walter murmured. Chloe beamed, sliding into the chair beside him. "Only the best for family reunions." Ethan poured whiskey into heavy tumblers, his movements smooth and deliberate. "To family," Chloe said, raising her glass with poised elegance. "To forgiveness and fresh starts," Ethan added, his eyes glistening as though with genuine emotion. Walter lifted his glass, the amber liquid shimmering in the light. "To Helen," he said softly. "She would have wanted this." They drank, and for a brief moment, Walter felt warmth spread in his chest, a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, this dinner could heal old wounds. But as the meal unfolded, a different kind of warmth spread, too insistent, too heavy. Lucia moved silently between the kitchen and dining room, serving lobster bisque and fresh bread. Walter noticed her hands tremble slightly as she set his bowl down, though she quickly composed herself. He offered her a polite nod of thanks, but she avoided his gaze. Chloe leaned forward, her knife slicing through bread with surgical precision. "Ethan tells me you've built quite the restaurant empire. 7 locations now, isn't it?" Walter chuckled modestly. "Empire's too big a word. Just years of hard work. Helen and I built it together." Ethan refilled his father's glass before he realized it was empty. "Don't be modest, Pop. 7 restaurants in New York, that's impressive." Walter felt a surprising warmth bloom in his chest. Even after their silence, his son had been keeping track. But then Chloe tilted her head. "Do you ever think about retirement, passing things along, legal arrangements for the future?" Walter hesitated. "One day at a time," he said carefully. Chloe's eyes flicked to Ethan's, a glance so quick Walter almost missed it. The room grew warmer, or maybe it was just him. He loosened his tie, taking another sip. Something about the evening felt curated. Chloe's perfect smile, Ethan's forced enthusiasm, the way they sat flanking him as though every word and action mattered. Lucia reappeared, this time carrying a tray of silverware. As she leaned over to place it, a fork slipped from her hand, clattering against the marble floor. Walter bent slightly, about to reach for it, but stopped when he caught her eyes. For the briefest moment, her gaze held his, wide, urgent, almost pleading. Then, just as quickly, she looked away, murmuring an apology as she retrieved the fork. Something twisted in Walter's chest. The evening had been filled with smiles and polished surfaces, but that single glance carried more weight than all of it. And then his phone buzzed in his pocket. He slipped it out discreetly, shielding the screen with his hand. A message glared back at him in capital letters. "Stand up, leave now, say nothing to your son." Walter's heart hammered against his ribs as the elegant dining room blurred for a moment. His hand shook, gripping the phone tighter. He looked up, Ethan and Chloe watching him with expectant smiles, as though nothing in the world could be wrong. Walter's hand trembled as he slid the phone back into his pocket, his knuckles brushing against the linen napkin folded neatly across his lap. He forced his face into something resembling calm. "Everything all right, Pop?" Ethan asked, leaning forward slightly, eyes too sharp for casual concern. "Just a wrong number," Walter replied with a tight smile. He reached for his glass, anything to steady himself. The amber whiskey caught the chandelier's glow as he raised it, but the warmth that spread through his chest this time was different. It wasn't comfort, it was fog. 2 glasses shouldn't make the room tilt, shouldn't make the crystal gleam so bright or the air so heavy. Helen's voice echoed in his mind, as clear as if she were sitting beside him. "Trust your gut, Walter, especially when something feels too perfect." He set the glass down, untouched. Chloe noticed. Her hand, adorned with a delicate gold bracelet, touched his arm lightly. "You look a little pale. Maybe some water?" "I'm fine," Walter said, but his voice sounded distant, even to himself. Lucia slipped into the dining room carrying the pot roast, the scent so close to Helen's recipe it nearly broke him. She set the dish down gently, but as she stepped back, her eyes flicked to his again, quick, urgent, deliberate. The world tilted another notch. Walter pressed his palms against the polished mahogany table and rose slowly. "Bathroom," he said, his tone steady but firm. "Second door on the left," Ethan offered quickly, a little too quickly. Walter nodded, walking down the hallway lined with expensive artwork, but when he reached the door, he didn't turn left. Something pulled him forward, an instinct sharpened by Helen's imagined whisper, urging him not to ignore what was right in front of him. He pushed through a swinging door into the kitchen. The air here felt different, less staged, more human. Pots and pans gleamed on hooks. The faint sound of running water filled the space. Lucia stood at the sink, rinsing crystal glasses. Her shoulders stiffened as she heard him enter, but she didn't turn. Walter hesitated. For a moment, the silence pressed in. Then his eyes found the back door, standing ajar. Beyond it lay a manicured lawn, motion lights casting sharp beams across the grass. Freedom. He stepped toward it, his heart pounding harder with each footfall. He expected Lucia to stop him, to ask what he was doing, but she stayed at the sink, her hands moving methodically, shoulders tense. Her silence was permission. Walter pushed the door open, slipping out into the cool night air. The scent of cut grass and summer flowers filled his lungs like a tonic. His shoes sank slightly into the damp lawn as he moved toward the gate at the edge of the property. Every step felt like defiance, like survival. The gate clicked softly behind him as he stepped onto a quiet street lined with other immaculate homes. He pulled his phone out with shaking fingers. The message still glared on the screen. His pulse throbbed in his ears as he dialed the number. 2 rings, then a voice, calm, deliberate, unmistakably cautious. "I hoped you'd call." Walter's throat tightened. "Who is this? Why did you send that message?" "You were in danger tonight." Walter let out a shaky laugh that sounded more like disbelief. "Danger? I was having dinner with my son." A pause, stretched long enough to make his heart race faster. Then the voice said, "Your son owes $2.3 million to people who don't forgive debts. Tonight, he and his wife plan to take everything from you." Walter's free hand gripped the iron gate for balance. "That's impossible." "The whiskey you brought," the voice continued, calm as a surgeon explaining a procedure. "They added a compound called zetralem. It makes alcohol 5 times stronger, leaves memory gaps, makes people pliable. They had documents prepared, power of attorney, property transfers. All they needed was your signature." Walter's stomach lurched. He thought of Chloe's careful questions about succession, Ethan's eagerness to refill his glass, the way his own head felt heavier than it should after just 2 drinks. "Who are you?" Walter whispered. "Someone who couldn't watch a good man lose everything." Walter swallowed hard, his throat dry. The voice knew too much. Drug names, debt amounts, legal papers. Someone inside the house. His mind flashed back to the kitchen, to Lucia's trembling hands, her urgent glance. She had been invisible all evening, yet watching everything. "Lucia," he breathed. The silence on the line was confirmation enough. Walter's knees felt weak, but a strange clarity cut through the fog. His son hadn't just drifted from him. He had crossed a line so dark it was almost unrecognizable. "Then why save me?" Walter asked. "Because you treated me like a person when they didn't," the voice said simply. Now listen carefully. They'll realize soon that you're gone. Don't go back. Protect yourself. Move your assets. Call your lawyer. And don't let them near you again. Headlights appeared at the end of the block, his Uber. Walter waved it down, sliding into the back seat. Where to, sir? The driver asked. Walter's lips parted, ready to give his home address in Queens, but then he stopped. He pulled Helen's photo from his wallet, her smile radiating courage. She had never backed down from hard truths, never chosen comfort over what was right. Walter straightened in his seat. Actually, he told the driver, his voice steadier than he felt, we're going back. The Uber driver gave him a puzzled glance in the rearview mirror. Back to the same house? Walter nodded firmly. Yes, same house. The car turned at the next intersection, headlights cutting through the manicured streets of Greenwich. Walter's heart pounded harder with every passing second, but there was no hesitation left in him. The voice on the phone, Lucia, had told him to stay away. But Helen's memory whispered louder. Doing right isn't always safe, Walter. But it's always right. By the time the sedan pulled back into the circular drive, Walter had wiped his palms against his trousers 3 times. He tipped the driver generously and stepped out, adjusting the jacket of his old suit. The fountain burbled as though nothing had changed, but to Walter, the air carried a sharp edge now, as though the night itself was watching. He rang the bell. Ethan opened the door within seconds, a too bright smile stretching across his face. Pop, thought you got lost out there. Walter forced a chuckle. Just needed some fresh air. City air feels heavy compared to this. Ethan's eyes searched his father's face for a moment longer than necessary before he stepped aside. Come on in. Dinner's waiting. The dining room looked untouched, as if time had paused in his absence. The pot roast still steamed on its platter. Chloe still sat poised with her perfect smile, her wine glass half full. The only thing that had changed was the knot in Walter's stomach. Everything all right? Chloe asked sweetly. Never better, Walter replied, taking his seat once more. His hand brushed against the phone in his pocket, the memory of Lucia's words pulsing like a second heartbeat. Ethan poured him another whiskey, the liquid glugging against crystal. To second chances, he said, raising his glass. Walter lifted his own glass, though he didn't drink. He swirled the whiskey slowly, watching the golden liquid catch the light. Funny thing about second chances, he said. Sometimes they're real, sometimes they're just another trick. The room went still. Chloe's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. You're sounding dramatic, Walter. Walter leaned back, feigning casualness. Maybe. Or maybe I've lived long enough to know when something feels off. He set the glass down gently, the sound ringing louder than it should have. Ethan's jaw clenched. Chloe smoothed the tablecloth with her manicured fingers. Lucia appeared quietly from the kitchen, collecting empty bowls. Her face remained neutral, but Walter caught the slightest flick of her eyes toward the front door, then back again, like a warning. Ethan forced a laugh, though it rang hollow. Pop, relax. We just want to enjoy a family dinner. Walter folded his hands, meeting his son's gaze evenly. Family isn't built on papers and signatures. It's built on trust. The words landed heavy. Ethan opened his mouth to reply. Bang, bang, bang. 3 sharp knocks rattled the door. A voice boomed through the entryway. Police, open the door! Ethan froze, his hand still hovering over the whiskey bottle. Chloe's eyes widened, darting to her husband in panic. The perfect evening cracked in an instant, the illusion splintering like glass under pressure. The first knock still rang through the foyer when Ethan's smile snapped like a rubber band stretched too far. The second and third knocks arrived with the weight of inevitability, measured, authoritative, impossible to ignore. From the entry hall came a calm baritone, Greenwich Police Department, open the door, please. Chloe rose halfway from her chair, then remembered herself and smoothed her dress, eyes darting to the liquor tray, to the papers that had been tidied away, to Walter's untouched glass catching the chandelier's light. Ethan's hand hovered above the bottle, then dropped to his side. Walter stood slowly. He didn't need Helen's voice to steady him now. He found his balance on his own. Ethan strode to the foyer and pulled open the door with a brightness that fooled no one. Officers, good evening. Is there a problem? 2 uniformed officers and a plainclothes detective stepped onto the marble, their posture efficient but not aggressive. The lead officer, broad-shouldered, middle-aged, and composed, flashed a badge. Evening. We received a call regarding a possible attempted poisoning and fraud in progress at this address. We're here to make sure everyone's safe. Chloe produced a hostess smile so polished it squeaked. There must be some mistake. We're having a family dinner. Walter moved into view beside Ethan. He didn't look at his son. He looked at the officers. I'm the one who called, he said evenly. I left and then returned to cooperate. My name is Walter Bennett. The detective's attention sharpened. Mr. Bennett, thank you. May we step inside? Ethan's jaw twitched. He stood still for a heartbeat too long. Of course, Chloe said brightly, filling the gap, stepping back from the threshold as if she were introducing friends to the foyer. Please, can I get anyone water? No, ma'am, the lead officer replied. Hands where we can see them, please. Everyone stay where you are. They moved as a unit toward the dining room. The house, so carefully staged, felt suddenly small. The perfect angles and polished surfaces offered no cover from the simple truth of uniforms, badges, and steady eyes. At the table, Walter picked up his glass, holding it carefully by the base. He tilted it toward the nearest officer. Before I left, this is what they poured for me. It looks wrong. Under the chandelier, faint flecks drifted through the amber. The junior officer donned gloves, took the glass, and held it to the light. You see that? He murmured to the detective. Suspended particulates. Chloe's voice thinned. Old decanter, maybe dust. We were... Ma'am, the detective said, kind but unyielding. We'll have a lab answer that. He turned to Walter. Mr. Bennett, did you ingest any of this? 2 earlier glasses, Walter said. Tonight it hit harder than it should have. I stepped away, got a warning, and called you. Ethan's composure cracked. Pop, come on. You got woozy. You've barely eaten all day. You know how whiskey is? The detective's gaze slid to Ethan. Sir, we'll get everyone's statements. For the moment, I need you to keep your distance. He glanced toward the sideboard. And away from the bottle. Ethan took 2 obedient steps back. The habit of doing what men with badges asked him to do had not yet deserted him. Mr. Bennett, the detective said, notebook out, pen ready. Do you believe there are any documents on the premises related to business transfers or powers of attorney prepared for your signature tonight? Walter let his attention drift across the room just long enough to be believable. If there are, they were out earlier and then not. The detective nodded once. We have enough for a protective sweep and to secure evidence in plain sight. He gestured to the junior officer who disappeared down the hall with a second uniform. The remaining officers stayed with the 3 of them, palms open, presence steady. Lucia hovered in the kitchen doorway, quiet as wallpaper. She met Walter's eyes for a single fraction of a second. It was not a plea this time. It was steadiness. The junior officer returned with a slim leather folder and a clipped stack of papers. These were in the study on the desk, sir, he told the detective. Signed drafts filled in with Mr. Bennett's information, power of attorney, transfer of business assets, prepared signature lines. The air in the dining room changed temperature. Chloe spoke first, words tumbling, trying on a new story mid-sentence. Those are for later. Ethan's lawyer said it's smart planning. It's estate work. This is a misunderstanding. The detective skimmed the top sheet, then another, his thumbnail clicking gently against the paper. Strange that the amounts match the assets listed on Mr. Bennett's business filings almost exactly. He set the papers flat, looked up. Mr. Bennett, did you ask for these to be drafted? No. Did you plan to sign them tonight? No. The detective nodded again, as if confirming his own suspicion more than anything. He looked to Ethan. Sir, what's your full name? Ethan swallowed. Ethan Bennett. Mr. Bennett, please place your hands on the back of that chair. Ethan didn't move. Fight flickered once in his eyes, then died. He did as he was told. The officer stepped behind him, firm but not rough. The radio on the officer's shoulder hissed softly to itself, a sound like rain. Wait, Chloe said, the word too loud in the quiet room. Wait, you can't... We haven't done anything. Ask him, she said, turning to Walter, her voice dropping into a trembling register Walter had heard on daytime TV confessions. Walter, please, tell them this is just a family thing. You know me. I would never... I don't know you, Walter said, and was surprised by how calm it sounded. I never really did. The cuffs clicked around Ethan's wrists, a small, decisive sound that felt larger than the room. Ethan flinched. Pop, he said, and the word held all his life in it. Toddler, teenager, man. "Pop, please, you don't know what they'll do to me." He twisted, found the detective's eyes, and then said the quiet part out loud. "I owe people, a lot. They gave me a deadline, 11 days. He took a breath that sounded like the beginning of a sob. "They said they'd break me, worse." The detective's face didn't change. He'd heard desperation before. It didn't keep anyone safe. "Sir, anything you say can be used against you. I'd advise you to stop talking until you have an attorney." Chloe pivoted to survival, fast. "He's the one," she blurted, pointing at Ethan as if the gesture could steer fate. "He planned everything. I was scared. He forced—" The lead officer turned to her, voice steady. "Ma'am, please put your hands behind your back." She recoiled, eyes wild. "You can't arrest me. I'm the one I made a roast. I set a table. This is absurd." The officer glanced toward the tray, toward the bottle shining like a prop under stage lights. "Ma'am," he said, as if he'd said it 1,000 times, "turn around." She did, finally, spine rigid with indignation that had nowhere to go. The second pair of cuffs closed with a crisp clack and a small, indrawn breath. For a second, Chloe looked like a mannequin in an expensive window display, beautifully dressed and completely hollow. The detective faced Walter again. "We're going to secure that bottle and the glasses, collect the documents, and transport both parties for booking. We'll need a full written statement from you. Are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" "I'm fine," Walter said. He meant it and didn't. "I'm steady enough to tell the truth." He felt the strength of that sentence nest in his chest. Lucia stepped one pace into the doorway, eyes lowered, hands folded at her apron, the smallest movement of a person who had learned to be invisible and had chosen, finally, not to be. The detective's gaze flicked to her. "Ma'am, do you live here?" he asked. "I work here," Lucia said softly. Her voice surprised Walter by how even it was. "I saw things." She looked at Chloe and then at the papers on the table and then at the bottle. "I can tell you what I heard." The detective nodded once, gratitude hidden inside procedure. "We'll get your statement as well." Ethan found his father again. No angle left, no script to play, just a son's last reach. "Pop," he said, raw and unvarnished, "how could you do this to your own family?" Walter held his eyes. The answer had arrived before the question. "Because you tried to destroy it." Silence settled, the kind that changes a room. The officers moved with the quiet choreography of people who had done this work for years. Evidence bags crinkled softly. The bottle slipped into one, sealed. The glass with its drifting flecks went into another. The leather folder with Walter's life reduced to signatures slid into a third. Radio's murmur clicked, codes and names in clipped shorthand. Outside, porch lights clicked on up and down the street, curious neighbors pretending they weren't looking. The fountain in the drive babbled, small and oblivious. A breeze lifted the curtain in the foyer and let it fall again. They guided Ethan and Chloe toward the door. Chloe's composure had collapsed into frantic whispers. "You're making a mistake. You're ruining our lives. You don't understand." But the officers didn't respond. That part was over. Ethan walked stiffly, jaw clenched, eyes somewhere past Walter, at a point only he could see. At the threshold, Ethan turned his head an inch. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't offer an apology. He just looked like a man who had finally found the bottom of a story he'd been telling himself. Walter did not look away. On the marble, a shard of crystal from an earlier glass caught the light in a small, cold sparkle. Walter stepped past it and followed them into the night air. The driveway felt longer now, the sky wider. The patrol cars waited with their light bars dark but ready, doors open, interiors smelling faintly of vinyl and old coffee. Somewhere down the block, a sprinkler hissed on, mechanically punctual. The detective paused beside Walter. "We'll take good care of the evidence," he said. "You did the right thing calling when you did." Walter nodded. He believed him. He also knew that believing it didn't make any of this easier. Chloe ducked into the back of one car, the door shutting with the soft thud of money meeting consequence. Ethan stood for a second longer beside the other, shoulders sagging, the cuffs bright against the navy of his jacket. He turned his face toward Walter one last time. "Pop," he said, voice low, frayed. "I'll fix it." Walter heard all the years packed into the vowel. He thought of Helen's patient hand smoothing a wrinkled tie, of Ethan at 6 with a scraped knee, of a boy who had once told the truth easily and then, somewhere along the way, learned to sell it. "No," Walter said quietly. "You'll start by facing it." The officer guided Ethan into the car, the door shut. Engines turned over, a polite purr in a polite neighborhood. The detective gave Walter a card. "We'll need you at the station tonight or first thing in the morning for a full statement. If you feel dizzy or off, go to urgent care and ask for a toxicology screen. Bring the paperwork to us." "I will," Walter said. Lucia stood just inside the doorway now, hands laced, eyes on the threshold as though it were a border between two countries. Walter met her gaze and for the first time that night allowed himself a small nod of thanks. She lowered her eyes again, humility or self-preservation, he couldn't tell. But he noticed her shoulders drop half an inch, as if the air itself had grown lighter. The officers climbed into their vehicles. Radios crackled. The cars rolled away, tires whispering against the smooth drive, then the street, then the hush of the neighborhood swallowing the sound like a secret. In the quiet that followed, the house seemed to exhale. The chandelier ticked as metal cooled. Somewhere, a clock chimed the quarter hour. Walter stood where the foyer met the dining room, a man shaped by choices and the cost of them. On the table, a second glass, poured for show and never touched, caught a last tremor of chandelier light. This was what a line looked like, he thought. Not dramatic, not shouted, just drawn. He picked up the card the detective had left and slid it into his wallet behind Helen's photo. The picture's edges were soft from years of use. She smiled up at him, steady as a lighthouse. He felt tired all the way to his bones, but it was the tired that came after finishing a hard job, not the tired that haunted empty rooms. He looked around at the table, the plates, the silver, the pretty theater of it, and knew it would all look different in the morning. He set the untouched whiskey on the sideboard, where it would be bagged and labeled in a few hours, and allowed himself one long, honest breath. As the police cars disappeared into the night, Walter stood alone in the doorway, the untouched whiskey still swirling with betrayal. The night settled heavy around the house, leaving a silence that felt almost reverent after the police cars rolled away. Walter stood by the doorway, his hand still resting on the frame as if bracing himself against the weight of all that had just happened. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't running. Not from loneliness, not from memories of Helen, not from the growing distance between himself and Ethan. He was standing exactly where he needed to be, even if the air still trembled with the echo of broken trust. Inside, the dining room looked like a stage after the actors had gone. The roast sat untouched, its steam long faded. The silverware gleamed with useless precision. On the sideboard, the whiskey decanter glowed under the chandelier like a relic from another life. Lucia moved quietly, gathering plates, her steps careful but unafraid. Walter watched her for a moment. She had been the whisper in the storm, the one who chose to act when silence would have been safer. "You saved me," Walter said softly. Lucia froze for half a beat, then turned with her usual humility. "I only told the truth." "That's not only," Walter replied. "That's everything." She lowered her gaze, but her lips curved in the smallest, most fragile smile. Walter pulled out a chair and sat, not because he needed to, but because he wanted to feel the room differently, less as a battlefield, more as a place reclaimed. He glanced at Helen's photo in his wallet, still tucked safely behind the detective's business card. Her smile reminded him that strength wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was in choosing kindness when bitterness would be easier. Morning came with a pale wash of sunlight through the tall windows. The world outside went on. Neighbors watered their lawns, joggers passed on the street, a delivery van pulled up 2 houses down. Life insisted on continuing, no matter how deeply one night had changed. By mid-morning, Walter had called his lawyer, secured his accounts, and begun the long process of repairing what Ethan and Chloe had nearly taken. But even with the legal safeguards in place, his heart felt heavier than any ledger. Late that afternoon, he returned to Queens. The modest house he had shared with Helen stood waiting, unchanged by Greenwich shadows. The air smelled faintly of lilacs, the kind Helen had planted decades ago. He walked through the front door, setting his keys in the familiar dish by habit. The living room welcomed him with old photographs, the kind that caught laughter and light more honestly than any polished dinner ever could. Walter sat in his favorite chair, the one Helen used to tease him about never replacing. For the first time in days, he let the silence feel like peace. The knock at the door startled him, but when he opened it, Lucia stood there, her hands nervously folded. "I came to check if you were all right," she said. Walter smiled, the kind that reached his tired eyes. "I am, because of you." She hesitated, then added, "I don't know what happens next for me. I may lose that job now." "Then maybe it's time for something better," Walter said. "Something honest." The moment stretched, quiet but full. Two people once overlooked, one by family, the other by circumstance, now stood at the edge of something new. Not salvation, not perfection, but a beginning. Walter stepped aside. "Come in. You shouldn't stand out there." As Lucia entered, the old house seemed to brighten, just a little. The weight of betrayal hadn't vanished, but it no longer defined him. Helen's photo caught the afternoon sun, her smile steady, almost approving. Walter whispered so softly only he could hear, "I'm still standing, Helen, and I'll keep building from here." The past had tried to silence him, but the future, fragile and waiting, had given him one more chance, and Walter Bennett, the man too many had underestimated, intended to use it well.